G'day folks, I'm attaching a graphic to this post. What I've done is I've extrapolated some data on it's COVID-19 statistics in Australia. This is purely Australian related, compared to deaths from other causes that are projected to occur in 2020. Now, I've posted data on this before. And this particular data, I've only included about 8 other causes of death anticipated to occur in Australia this year. But the main point of this graphic, I guess, was because I've also included in this graphic the current funeral gathering restrictions in Australia, in the 7 states. And this serves to highlight for anyone who hasn't seen this or hasn't been watching or hasn't been looking at the data or hasn't been monitoring the various restrictions that are in place for each state, because the federal government has, under the Biosecurity Act, given the states the power to implement their own measures in regards to the overall pandemic response. So I've put the funeral restrictions in this data set just to show people, to make people aware that if you set COVID aside for a minute, okay, and you look at all the other expected deaths from these other causes in Australia that are expected to happen, and that data is taken from WHO, the World Health Organization, who we know are a big fraud themselves, but it's the data we have, so we have to go by that. Okay, so that's data projected by the World Health Organization based on prior year deaths in Australia by other causes. Now, if you look at the graphic, I'll just bring it up. Current COVID deaths as at today in Australia are reported to be 379 deaths, which is approximately 0.0015% of the population, okay, with a 58% recovery rate based on the cases, a total of 23,035. And let's just forget that for a minute, because we know that's all conflated data. But if you look at the anticipated deaths from other causes, which we can assume that those estimates are accurate, correct, based on the prior year's deaths and data, we can see that road fatalities, there's an estimated 1,243 people are going to die this year. Dementia, Alzheimer's, it's just astonishing, 14,500 odd deaths will occur this year. Suicide deaths, 3,187, which I expect, actually, based on what I've been researching since COVID, that suicide death is way under, that estimate is way under what it's going to be, because, as you all know, there's been a lot more suicides because of the COVID-19 response, as a direct cause of the COVID-19 response. So that suicide death, by the end of the year, folks, that anticipated death rate will be actual. And look, in Australia, I'm anticipating that's going to go up to about 10,000 people. People die. 2,554 people die from falls each year. Prostate cancer, 3,551. So on and so forth. You can read that data for yourself. And I've also extrapolated out the percentage of the population for each of those other death causes, okay? And I've notated next to each one of those whether it's greater than or less than the COVID deaths that have occurred. And in each case, of course, in these particular other causes of death, in each case, more people die of these other things, okay? Now, with the funeral attendance restrictions, each state except Northern Territory, so let me grab the data, each state except the Northern Territory has some sort of gathering restrictions in respect to funerals and weddings and church gatherings, okay? Northern Territory, they don't have any number limits at funerals except for the usual bullshit of the social distancing, okay? Now, which I'm even confused about now, because in some places it's 1.5 metre distance, in other places it's 2 square metres. Go figure. I mean, who the hell works this shit out? I mean, really? Who the hell is sitting there at a computer number crunching for the government as a stooge to work this shit out? You got to ask yourself that question too. Who's doing all this bullshit for the government? People like you and I, workers, just sitting there. This is what they do all day, contriving this crap to inflict upon the population. Anyway, Tasmania, they're probably the next leanest, or they're the next state that has lenient funeral gatherings. And in Tasmania, you can have up to 500 people outdoors at a funeral. But then if you read the rule, it just goes on with all this rubbish and all this convoluted explanation as to, but you can have up to 500 people, but they've got to abide by such and such a distance. Some venues, if it can only hold 100 people, we can only have 100 people. So, look, most of these funeral restrictions are pretty standard, but there are some very convoluted exceptions. And of course, bloody Victoria, they've got different restrictions now for regional and metro, but generally speaking, they have a limit of 10 people at a funeral, okay, generally speaking. But alongside that, there's also the very, very, very austere movement restrictions at the moment, and of course the curfew, which there is some conjecture about at the moment. Pardon me, whether this hard lockdown that's happened in Melbourne is to do with the rescue of children from child trafficking. Now, I'm going to say that's conjecture at the moment, because I personally haven't seen any proof of children being rescued en masse in Melbourne. If it's a covert operation, then I could understand why, okay? And to be honest, the general public in Australia, guys, you wouldn't be ready. You wouldn't be ready to see or know about that. You all know about human trafficking and child sex trafficking, child sex abuse that goes on. But the fact that this is all now coming to a head globally, and it might be happening in Melbourne, that's something that you're just going to have to wait and see. Okay, for now, everyone in Australia, and especially in Victoria, is just trying to deal with these lockdowns. But I think it's important to know why Victoria has had such a hard lockdown. And it's not just because Dictator Dan's a dickhead. There's got to be, people must realise there's some other underlying reason for that, okay? So the total deaths in Australia is 379. Now, which is negligible. Heart goes out to anyone who has actually died from COVID, but it's negligible really, okay? Now, the other thing I wanted to mention was, if you look at this data in the big picture, in the big scheme, funeral attendances are limited. Church attendance is basically limited and restricted. In some places, cancelled. Or there's very, very austere conditions where you can go to a church, what you have to do, abide by the social distancing. Basically, worship, human ceremonies like weddings and funerals, churches, aged care, where we go to pay respect, not just pay respect, but we go to visit our loved ones, right? We go to visit our mums and dads, our aunties and uncles, grandmas and grandpas. All these things where where the powers that be know that humankind needs to do things that they need to do to express their humanity. These are the things that are being targeted. These are the things that are being targeted. Now that alone, and this is across the world, it's not just in Australia, that alone must speak something of a little voice to the average person on the street as to the actual evil nature behind who and what has been targeted as part of the COVID-19 response. It must speak something. If you have 1 ounce of spiritual yearning or spiritual knowledge in your body, in your essence of yourself, you must see the purely evil nature that these lockdowns have imposed on not just human movement, but where we gather and how we worship and how we pay respect to our dead and how we pay respect to a newly married couple. These are all things that are intrinsic and essential to human existence on earth, okay? And that there's a spiritual nature to all these things, okay? But these are the things that are being targeted. Because if you, God forbid you die in Australia in 2020, God forbid, and God rest the souls of people that have died and will die, because the number of people that will be allowed to come to your funeral under these COVID-19 directions will be very limited. So people won't be able to say goodbye to you properly. People aren't being allowed to see their loved ones in aged care that could die tomorrow. Do you understand the evil nature of this attack? So I guess that's all I wanted to say. I have sources for this data for anyone wants them. I've put a couple of sources in the graphic, but if you want any more info on the source, then just put a comment in the post. But that's all, guys. Thank you, and I really enjoyed putting this data together. As I said, I just wanted to draw attention to the nature of this, what the response is doing, what it's actually targeting specifically of what we can't do. So, look, keep strong, keep healthy too. That's one of the main things at the moment is to keep healthy mentally and physically, because that's one thing that'll get us through this nonsense. And hopefully most of us Aussies will come out the other side. We'll be better people for it. We'll be stronger. We'll be wiser. We'll be more knowledgeable. And look, thanks for listening, guys. And God bless everyone and take care, whatever's happening in your world. All right. Ciao. Thanks, guys.